Hey everyone. Hope everybody is having a good week so far. We'll just give it another couple seconds here for some other people to just kind of stream in, and then we'll get started. All right. I think we're in good shape here. Start with an introduction and welcome everybody to inside quarter two of 2025's most dangerous cloud storage threats. My name is Connor Parkinson. I am the product manager here at Cloud Storage Security. And today I'm excited to kind of walk you through whatever our internal threat laboratory, Casmer Labs, has detected, what we've investigated, and what we've kind of determined as the biggest or the most significant threats to cloud storage so far in the second quarter of 2025. That being said, let's get right into it. So, cloud storage security, what are our credentials? We aim to protect all data everywhere. So, we focus very heavily on the storage layer in the cloud, as well as on premises, so that businesses can move forward freely and fearlessly. They can build without the worry of a data breach, costly compliance violations, any of those major threats that come along with storing data anywhere. Actually. So let's talk a little bit about the 2024 retrospect. And so the main idea here and a lot of the trends that we're seeing is that the cloud is growing. The storage layer in the cloud is growing particularly. And a lot of organizations are continuing to default to cloud-based services and when they're trying to, build a new application or they're trying to migrate something, increasingly they're going to the cloud. And so to go along with that and this kind of seismic increase of the amount of data stored in the cloud is that data breaches are very common. So around 40% of total data breaches were cloud based, which is a pretty significant number, just about under half. We're also seeing that data breaches in the cloud are both costly and that the price is rising. And what this means is that, particularly in the public cloud, the private cloud is a little bit of a different story, but they were the most expensive type of data breach, costing around just over 5 million USD, and increasing actually 13.1% year over year. And this is according to the IBM cost of a data breach report. What we're seeing here as a summation is that attackers are continuing to shift their focus towards data. So that being said, Casmer Labs, our internal threat laboratory, encountered a plenty of threats this quarter, and so we found that the threats, and rather the most prominent threats, were number one, the lack of activity monitoring, misconfiguration exploitation, and evolving strains of malware. And that kind of goes along with the proliferation and the increasing popularity of ransomware as a service, right? And then on the right here, we talked about this in our quarter one threat report, but you don't need experience to carry out a misconfiguration or a malware or ransomware attack. We're finding that increasingly the means to kind of carry these out are becoming democratized via ransomware as a service, possibly even generating net new malware using generative AI, and also just the availability of tools that actually query public buckets and kind of surface misconfigurations over the public internet. We also found that human error, inexperience, and manual processes are the most substantial risk factors that contribute to these three top threats for this quarter. That being said, let's jump right in. So let's talk about the lack of activity monitoring. And what this means is generally, both insider and external attacks can come from privileged or non-privileged users. And the general attack path is there's some sort of reconnaissance and an initial compromise. And this could be an attacker finding a vulnerability in a bucket or a misconfigured Amazon S3 bucket. They'll get into that bucket. They'll establish their footholds. Maybe they found AWS keys that allow them to basically go ahead and escalate their privileges and go access more buckets. They look through the inventory of what they have access to and what they can cause damage to, and then they go ahead and they complete their mission. They encrypt all the files, they exfiltrate the data, so on and so forth, whatever that particular attacker is looking to do. And the consequences, as with many of these threats, are pretty severe, right? The financial impacts, we talked about them earlier, just over 5 million average, sensitive data loss, and whose recovery is not guaranteed, even if the ransom is paid, according to some of our first party research. Reputational damage, everybody knows this, kind of the revenue loss with customers, the loss of pipeline, losing renewals, things like that, are all consequences of a severe, you know, cloud threat. And so, as we move into the notable attacks in quarter two, we have to talk about the Coinbase incident. I know people are tired of hearing about it, but this one was pretty interesting in the sense that overseas support employees were actually bribed to exfiltrate data. So we don't have all the details, but the questions that we have to ask are: were these employees were they supposed to have access to the sensitive information? Were they supposed to have access to download the sensitive information? So on and so forth. There could be a permission issue there, but what happened was information PII on over 70,000 customers were breached. And so pretty brutal. Lots of pretty negative consequences, including compliance violations. I believe an FTC case was opened up as well, so they're still working through it to this day, even though this kicked off, I believe, on May 15th of 2025. When we talk about preventing and detecting a serious breach, we always advocate for rotating credentials, right? This is pretty simple stuff. Strong password policies, including MFA. This couldn't have stopped the Coinbase incident, but what we're talking about here, particularly, are implementing strict IAM controls, least privilege, and for organizations with massive cloud environments, this is easier said than done, obviously. But we also need a backup strategy, right? If this data is gone and it's leaked out into the dark web and it's being sold, at the very least, you want to be able to restore that customer data so you can get back into production as soon as possible and kind of avoid any service outages. The detection methods is, monitor CloudTrail logs if we're talking about AWS for unusual activity, mass downloads, case of ransomware events, mass encryption events. But we also recommend customers use anomaly detection tools to kind of automate this. And then what this is doing is it's looking for not only things that are out of the ordinary, but particularly indicators of compromise, indicators of data exfiltration, like in the Coinbase incident. And it actually has the ability to flag that and also remediate it or stop it before data is lost. When we talk about recovery and education, maintain offline backups, same story as before. Implement storage volume ransomware scenarios as a part of your incident response planning. This could also be extended to include data exfiltration scenarios as a part of incident response planning. On the education, we're big proponents of that here. We think that training teams on number one, secure coding practices to avoid hard coded credentials. That's how one of the major breaches earlier this year, the Code Finger campaign and the Code Finger attacks, appeared to have arisen. And then also educating employees on the phishing and the credential compromise tactics, social engineering, whatever that might be. We advocate for at least quarterly training on that. Misconfiguration exploitation. And this has been a big one as well this year. In the first half of the year, we've seen a couple dozen serious breaches of more than 100,000 records. Quarter two was actually a little slower, which is a good thing, obviously. Less people's information is being compromised. But the summary here is it's basically a hole in security policies. And the most common one by far is public read and write access. And this is something that can be as easy as, for example, using a publicly available online tool on the public internet, by the way, not even in the dark web, or you have to download a Tor browser to access it, is Grey Hat Warfare. And what it's doing is it's querying publicly accessible buckets. It's the easiest misconfiguration for cyber criminals to exploit. But we can also talk about publicly accessible EBS volumes, misconfigured ACLs, whatever that might be. There's particularly hundreds of people. that could be a result, or rather cause a data breach. The process, as I talked about before, is looking for these storage repositories that are misconfigured. They look for sensitive information, and then they simply download those files or exfiltrate that data. Um, when that data is unmonitored in storage, with default or maybe even no permission or encryption settings, are also prime opportunities for exploitation, right? And in quarter two of 2025, even though I said it was a slower month, or sorry, a slower quarter, tens of millions of records were breached, exposed, lost, due to these attacks leveraging misconfigurations. So let's talk about some major misconfiguration incidents that we found. The first one was Work Composer. And so this was a publicly accessible Amazon S3 bucket that was discovered. And what it was housing was over 21 million screenshots of the monitored employees' laptops or desktops or whatever that might be. And of course, that could include, personal meetings, it could include credentials, it could include internal memos, whatever that might be. Literally, whatever was on that employee's computer at the time was screenshotted and could have been exposed as part of this breach. And so, what this is doing is this is supplementing social engineering and phishing attacks. If someone can say, "Hey, we saw that you had a meeting on this day," because they had seen the screenshot, that could be used to add credibility. And then the list kind of goes on from there. We're also talking about Vroom is another one, another publicly accessible S3 bucket. 27,000 sensitive records, but these are a little bit more serious. Bank statements, driver's licenses, medical records, bank records. The list kind of goes on there, and so that information could also be used to supplement social engineering. But the primary risk there is that that information could be used to commit identity theft, other sorts of fraud, so on and so forth. There. The consequences, right? Obviously, you lose data if a customer has, or sorry, if a cyber actor has downloaded that sensitive data, you can be fined as a part of a data breach. System outages, reputational damage, loss of current customers in your pipeline. And although AWS in particular wants to work with a customer if they believe that it has been misconfigured or if there has been a mistake, sometimes they can suspend your account for your own good, especially. But in some cases, that can also consequently take down production. Let's continue on here to how you can remediate these. So we want to make sure that all the storage resources, particularly containing sensitive information, are not publicly viewable or accessible. And this is not a rule across all. There's perfectly valid reasons for example, an Amazon S3 bucket to be publicly accessible, hosting web assets, so on and so forth. But what we want to do is we want to implement notifications to let an administrator know when new storage resources are created, or particularly when those new storage resources are created with default public access as well. Least privilege principle, this makes sense as well. Configuring the default values to enforce as many security policies as possible. So enforcing um, public sorry, denying public access by default is a big one. And then also we talked about this earlier, but continual education and making sure that everybody is aware of the best practices, how to correctly configure resources when they're created, recent threats, recent trends, recent cyber attacks, what these cyber actors are actually up to, because it changes so very often, as you may know, so on and so forth. And let's jump into malware and ransomware as a service as kind of our third big threat. And so malware, it's pretty simple. Everybody knows this, but it's ingested into your cloud storage in any one of a number of ways. If you're scraping data from the public internet, if somebody uploads a malicious file and you're kind of pulling that up, so on and so forth, that can be a way that it gets up there. The downstream risk is primary here, so it could be distributed to employees, partners, a customer, even via an application, managed file transfer, whatever that might be. And then they go ahead and they double click that file or that piece of malware, including ransomware, and it detonates on their local machine and it kicks off an incident. It could be a keylogger, could be an info stealer, could be a Trojan horse, whatever that might be. And the consequences are pretty similar, right? So, sensitive data loss, financial impacts, regulatory fines, remediation, and then, of course, the ransom itself. This piece of malware is actually a piece of ransomware. Reputational damage, losing your pipeline again, and then it can actually take down your applications depending on where it detonates. So, not the best. to kind of have happen. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into how malware is ingested, right? So compromised credentials could be used to upload malware and kind of draw it into cloud storage. Phishing attacks that kind of cause them to, or rather, someone to download malware. Automated integrations, dormant data, internal threats. Maybe somebody on your team who isn't the happiest with their gig and wants to get a couple extra bucks in their pocket, could upload a piece of malware. And then we talk about dev and test environments and also application generated data. So even if this data is internally generated, depends on how there might be malicious code in there. Although we've seen far fewer examples of this in the real world. So when we talk about the top malware families, and this is an interesting one, right? Over the last, let's say, a last year, actually, info stealers have kind of made a pretty significant or sharp rise to the top of what we see at Casmer Labs. And what we've kind of detected here was, or rather, what this kind of goes along with is the focus of attackers on the data itself, not necessarily applications, but wherever this data is, because data sells, particularly sensitive data on the dark web, social security numbers, bank statements, whatever that might be, to go and, you know, somebody who can buy it and then go commit fraud and so on and so forth. We talk about botnet malware, particularly families like Mirai that are kind of focused on IoT devices, security cameras, routers. The it goes, the list goes on. And then rats, so remote access Trojans. A lot of them are very similar to like a team viewer or something like that to kind of put it into to kind of visualize what it seems like. But essentially, they're able to remotely control their computer. They can exfiltrate your data. They could install further malware. They could compromise a system. They could kick off. They could log into a cloud account and kick off a ransomware attack that way. Um, that's kind of the main risks, or actually one of the many main risks of rats or remote access Trojans. So when we talk about preventing malware, right, we want to apply event-based malware scanning policies to the cloud storage so that you can make sure that none of that malware that's up in the cloud gets caught, it gets quarantined or deleted, and it makes sure that it's not going to make it down to any of your employees, your customers, or your partners, local machines. So zero trust approach, we say trust no file, right? It's very similar. You need to scan everything coming in, so trust but verify, even if it's from a partner or customer. There's no way to kind of ensure that their security policies are similar to yours. You also want to kind of enforce that least privilege access control for who can upload or download files, enable versioning. That's pretty self-explanatory. But you also want to know what's in your buckets, how they're configured, and who has access as well. What are some themes across everything, across all the research and the analysis that we've done over the past couple months? Misconfigure permissions and a reliance on default configuration, right? A lot of it's human error. Particularly, it only takes one mistake to make a Amazon S3 bucket publicly accessible, and then anybody on the public internet can go ahead and download and exfiltrate that sensitive data. We talk a lot about poor monitoring and alerting practices. So when these are actually kicking off, when these cyber incidents are kicking off, it's just kind of going on and nobody's being notified. The Coinbase attack, allegedly, the bucket had been public for a number of days at that point. So it was truly something that the cyber actors were able to fully exploit. Lack of encryption for data at rest. So if this data were encrypted, unfortunately, or rather fortunately, um, if it were, the even if the bucket were public or if the data were exfiltrated, it wouldn't be possible for an attacker or a cyber actor to actually read that data. And then finally, we're talking about proactive malware protection. And what this means is that you need to make sure that you have malware protection. Just like you do on your local machines, you wouldn't let an employee run one, without malware protection. You need it up in the cloud as well to add another layer of defense before it actually gets down to the local machine. So, what to consider, right? We talked a lot about this internally, and what we're anticipating are a lot of basically just the continuation of high profile data breaches. Misconfiguration issues, ransomware attacks, monetary and reputational consequences for cloud data breaches are going to continue to rise as more data flows into the cloud. That data becomes more distributed. There's a higher chance for human error. And there's also more data generally, obviously. And so that data um, kind of proportionally as those data breaches reach consistently over 100,000 records. That's more reputational damages, and that's more remediation costs, credit monitoring for those affected, so on and so forth. And we also talk a lot about lowering barriers to entry for malicious actors via ransomware as a service. So GLIN, which is the kind of the big group that we found to more or less kind of replace the void of kind of the big players in the balance of last year. Um, they're pretty interesting. We actually have an article on them about how they're offering legal counsel to their customers to actually write legal statements and threaten legal action against their victims, which is a little scary, but certainly interesting to say the least. So, what should you do today? Automated solutions. You need to make sure that you can train your employees as much as you can, but it only takes one mistake. So, an automated solution, something mechanized that can manage configurations and monitor activity and kind of alert when it's seeing a ransomware attack or a data exfiltration event. You need proactive malware scanning in your cloud environment, even though it's not executable. We talked about it earlier. There is a very, very significant downstream risk of those files being downloaded and then executed on a local machine. You also need to educate yourself and your employees on ransomware and misconfiguration prevention, along with kind of the most recent threats, right? So this a good example of this actually was the Coinbase, or sorry, the Codefinger incident earlier this year. And what the Codefinger incident was essentially AWS access keys that were used to basically mass encrypt buckets or those objects within those buckets. And so organizations actually picked up on this pretty quickly, and they enabled S3 lifecycle event notifications, which would actually alert when the lifecycle was changed to delete the object within 7 days, which is what the Coinbase attackers did. So we've talked a lot. How does CSS help? Um, we're focused on the data layer in the cloud. And so what this means, excuse me, and so what this means is that particularly on, we don't focus on the apps, we don't focus on the network, we're hyper focused on the data layer. And so we provide data security via an inventory report. We show you where all of your data is, if it's sensitive, is it stale, is it configured properly. We can scan that data for malware, including ransomware. We can manage configuration en masse. So we have over 90 security checks that look for misconfigurations that could result in a data breach. And we also have those proactive monitoring and forensics tools that allow you to alert when a suspected ransomware event or a data exfiltration event is kicking off. And then also the ability to kind of very easily parse through the relevant logs, look at file access patterns or user access patterns on a very granular level without manually digging through thousands and thousands of the respective logs. That being said, I'm going to pull up my computer here, my personal screen, and we are going to check through a quick demo. So right here is where you land, and this is kind of the majority of what we talked about today. And a solution like this would be able to kind of solve those misconfigurations. So what we're doing here is we're checking over 90 configuration options. You can see all of them here, and we're looking for things like S3 bucket public access. So let's see here. Don't worry, these public buckets are intended to be public. They're testing buckets for our malware scanning solution, but we'll actually show you all of these public buckets, and then you can go ahead and take the resource name. You can know where it is, what provider it's on, and then when the check was actually performed. So you can figure out, okay, how new is this check, or how recent is this problem? Another thing I want to talk about here is the change history report. And what this shows is the ability to see ACL changes. So that's not a good one. Let's go down here. So, for example, If you wanted to know who made a bucket public, you could come down to the change history report. You could sort and you could filter on that particular resource, and then you could see, okay, who made the change. For example, the through the account ID right here, and yeah, then you could go ahead and you could do that forensics work as well. We'll keep it fast and quick here, but the query builder allows you, for example, if you do have a publicly accessible bucket. So I will actually go right back here and I'll grab this resource name here and we can go into the monitoring here and we can see if somebody actually downloaded any objects from this. So let's go back here. Let's down this. We'll punch in the ARN. You'll add the filter. And of course, you can filter by identity, event name. Let's actually look at get objects right here. Add another filter, and then we're going to run the query. And so what this is doing is this is looking through CloudTrail logs on this particular bucket and looking for get objects. And so it looks like if this were theoretically an important bucket with sensitive information, we can verify that nobody's downloaded information from there. With that being said, we also give you the inventory as well. So all of your buckets, all of your containers, including where they are, the total size, objects, average file size, and then the top three we think, which are publicly accessible, whether or not encryption is enabled, and whether or not versioning is enabled as well. The same story for block storage. So these are all of your EPS volumes. In the case of AWS, you can see your total resources over time, the distribution of the disk types, whether or not most of your disks do or don't have snapshots. And then we give you as much information as we can get. For example, on the provision side, when it was created, if it has a snapshot, what the snapshot's name is, and also the state of the drive. And for the sake of time, we also do the inventory for file systems as well, but it's the same information. So with that being said, let's hop right back into the presenter screen right here and just thank everybody for attending today. We appreciate your time. I'm going to stick around for just a couple minutes to see if we have any questions. Um, but if not, you can always reach out to us at sales@cloudstorage.sec.com, or you can head to AWS Marketplace for a 30-day free trial of our antivirus solution. Data Defender, which I just brought up right there, is actually in a closed beta right now. So you can request access. We're not charging for it at the moment, but we're trying to get as many customers, as much feedback as possible on the solution. So if you join us there, you can get just about deployed in just about an hour. And yeah, you can get started and kind of understand the value that we're bringing in terms of security at the storage layer. I'm going to hang around for just another minute here. All right. Looks like we're all good. With that being said, have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thanks for attending. And yeah, tune in next month for our threat report on all the things that we've seen in July. Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.